time.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Very good morning. Welcome to Bev Turner today on GB News TV and DAB Radio, of course. OK, the top story that everyone's talking about is the ongoing questioning around ethical standards within the Conservative Party. The Prime Minister has asked an independent ethics advisor to investigate the Tory party chair's tax affairs. Nadhim Zahawi has welcomed the investigation, apparently saying that he's confident that he acted properly throughout. Labour are calling for him to resign. We'll find out the latest at the top of the show. And in Scotland, tension between businesses and the climate campaign. Businesses in Glasgow are calling for a delay of the rollout of low emission zones in order to help the city recover from the pandemic. Stay tuned to find out why. And teachers are striking in Scotland. We'll be talking to the Educational Institute of Scotland Union as to why and when they will stop. That's all coming up after a look at the latest news.
Good morning, I'm Tamsin Roberts in the GB Newsroom. It's 1 minute past 10. A report by the probation watchdog in England and Wales found a catalogue of failings left a sexual predator free to kill Zara Elena days after he was released from jail. Jordan McSweeney was given a life sentence last month after he admitted killing the law graduate as she walked home in East London last June. The findings show McSweeney should have been treated as a high risk of serious harm offender, but was wrongly graded as medium risk. Policing Minister Chris Philp says the government has ordered a review into how probation staff supervise a 29-year-old.
The probation service, I think, has completely accepted the recommendations the inspector has made. They're making changes to the way they risk assess offenders. They're putting more resources into it. They've hired, I think, an extra couple of thousand, 2,500 probation service staff in the last 2 years. They're increasing their funding by £155 million to make sure this doesn't happen again. They're supervising, I think, over 200,000 offenders. This kind of incident is thankfully very rare, but it is appalling and heartbreaking when it does happen.
Latest figures show government borrowing hit a new record high last month as the cost of living crisis continues to hit households. The Office for National Statistics says the government borrowed £27.4 billion in December, the highest monthly figure since 1993. Chancellor Jeremy Hunt says the government is making tough decisions to get debt falling. Almost 2,000 ambulance workers in the northwest are walking out today in an ongoing dispute over pay. The government says it will continue to engage in talks with the NHS, but the union says ministers are belittling their efforts to save lives rather than discussing a pay offer. Northwest paramedic Paul Turner says they don't want to strike, but they want the government to save the NHS.
We are massively understaffed, and when we get called for jobs, we're struggling to get there. You know, we're hearing constantly on our radios that there is emergencies outstanding and no one to go to them because we're either queuing outside hospital or we just don't have the staff to respond. We've had 10 years now of austerity. with no real-term pay rises. We are constantly under inflation. And now I've got members right behind me and all over the UK that are returning to food banks and looking to other means to be able to pay.
Police forces across England and Wales will adopt a new strategy to tackle organised crime. The tactic known as Clear, Hold, Build is being introduced by the Home Office following successful pilots in 7 forces, including West Yorkshire. The plan is that officers will clear gang members from crime hotspots, hold control of the area to stop other criminals taking over, and then, with other agencies, help build the area to keep crime down. A senior Conservative MP has suggested the Prime Minister did not know Nadeem Zahawi had any outstanding tax issues when he appointed him as chair of the party. Just a warning of flashing images coming up.
You're going to resign, Mrs Zahawi. Do you feel under pressure to resign, sir?
Rishi Sunak has ordered an ethics inquiry into Mr Zahawi's tax affairs after he admitted paying a settlement to HMRC following an error over shares in a polling company he co-founded. The former Chancellor has welcomed the investigation, saying he's confident he acted properly throughout. A man has been charged with murder after a body was found dumped in a street in Wigan last year. Liam Smith was shot and his body covered in acid before being left on Kilburn Drive on the 24th of November. Michael Hillier from Sheffield has been charged with the murder and is due to appear at Tameside Magistrates Court today. At least 7 people have died in a mass shooting at 2 locations in the northern Californian city of Half Moon Bay. Officials say the suspect was arrested yesterday after driving to a police parking lot after attempting to turn himself in. It's the second mass shooting in as many days in the US state after 11 people were killed in Monterey Park on Saturday. The government is resisting calls for a large-scale pilot menopause leave programme. Ministers have also rejected making menopause a protected characteristic under the Equalities Act. The Conservative MP Caroline Noakes says she's disappointed by the lack of action by the government in response to the committee's report. But the government says the suggested approach might not be the best solution to support women. Eligible households will receive peak-time electricity discounts again today in an effort to avoid blackouts. 26 suppliers have signed up to the National Grid's Demand Flexibility Scheme between 5:30 and 6 p.m. tonight after its first live test yesterday. It involves paying businesses and households to turn off electric appliances for an hour or 2. This is GB News. More from me in half an hour. Now, though, it's back to Bev.
Very good morning. Welcome to Bev Turner Today. Thank you for joining me on GB News TV and DAB Radio. Here's what's coming up on this morning's show. Nadeem Zahawi is fighting for his political life this morning after the Prime Minister ordered his ethics advisor to look into the Conservative Party chairman over a multi-million-pound tax penalty. The Labour Party are calling for him to resign. What does this mean for the integrity of the Conservatives? And Metropolitan Police recruits are being hired without face-to-face interviews, which tests them on their motives and values, according to one recruitment consultancy. This has caused concern that potentially unsuitable candidates are slipping through the net. I'm also going to have a good news policing story with my panel this morning, so stay tuned for some positivity. And my guests this morning, the political editor at the Daily Express, Sam Lister, and the author Joanna Williams, with some very thought-provoking stories today, including Prince Andrew's PR comeback and why women's healthcare in the UK is languishing at the bottom of league tables. But of course, this show is nothing without you and your views. Don't forget to vote in my Twitter poll, please. This morning, I am asking you, if Nadeem Zahawi has lied about his taxes, are you confident that Prime Minister Rishi Sunak would have the leadership strength to expel him from the party? So far, 70% of you say no. Sunak would not do what you might consider to be the decent thing. Cast your vote now, or as always, email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, to have your say. So, as I mentioned there, Nadeem Zahawi is facing calls for his resignation today after the Prime Minister asked his independent ethics advisor to investigate the Conservative Party chairman's tax affairs. It follows reports that Zahawi paid a penalty to HMRC while he was Chancellor. In a statement, he said that he was confident that he acted properly throughout. So joining me now is political reporter Olivia Utley. Good morning, Olivia. Remind us how we've got to this point. How did this all come to light and what is he accused of?
So Nadeem Zahawi's tax affairs were first investigated while he was Chancellor back in July. He threatened the Independent who were investigating the case with legal action, and HMRC essentially let the matter rest for a while. All went quiet for a bit, and now last week it emerged that he had to pay a penalty to HMRC. It then was revealed that HMRC had said that it wasn't the sort of worst degree of mismanagement because it was careless rather than deliberate. But now the story sort of rumbled on for a few days, got more and more awkward for the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister was dragged into it himself because it wasn't clear whether Rishi Sunak knew about these allegations of tax evasion when he appointed Nadeem Zahawi as Prime Minister. So now Rishi Sunak has ordered this investigation by Laurie Magnus, the new ethics advisor, into Nadeem Zahawi's tax affairs. Clearly, Rishi Sunak thinks there is more to come out, and Sunak wants to sort of move the onus away from him to do anything about it.
I'm just looking at some of the people who've been wading into this, because obviously it's rich pickings for anybody that wants the Conservative Party to look bad at the moment. There's a lot in here, isn't there? Because you can attack it from all sides. It raises questions, doesn't it, about why he took the job as Chancellor, if he was being investigated by the HMRC at that time. Was it deliberate or was it, as he says, accidental? And it also raises questions, of course, for Rishi Sunak, which is what I'm tweeting today, and how he reacts to this. What's your sense in what he might do, or is he just playing a pretty straight bat at the moment?
Well, it's a very, very tricky issue for Rishi Sunak because when he became Prime Minister, of course, we all remember the last turbulent few years for the Conservative Party, and Rishi Sunak was the sort of straight-laced guy who was promising to restore accountability and integrity to public office. Well, since then, he's had a slew of mini-scandals from inside his own front benches. We had Suella Braverman, she was dismissed for leaking. She was under investigation for leaking confidential material. He then rehired her. That turned into a story. We had Gavin Williamson, who had to step down because of a big controversy. We had Dominic Raab, who's accused of bullying, and who was also being investigated for a breach of the ministerial code, like Nadeem Zahawi. He stayed in office. And now we've got this scandal. And it just makes things very difficult for Rishi Sunak. And you know, the way he's handling it now by turning it over to the ethics advisor, by making it a question of did he or did he not break the ministerial code, well, it's one way of handling it, but there are many on the Conservative backbenches who are sort of whispering that that's not really the point. Look how it's making the Conservative Party look. Wouldn't a Prime Minister with more sort of political nous, a grip of how this looks to the rest of the country, just makes Nadeem Zahawi step aside now? Because, you know, whether or not he's found to have technically broken the ministerial code, it's really not a good look. And one issue which has been raised to me among Conservative backbenchers is that the idea of evading millions of pounds worth of tax is so alien to almost everyone in this country that it just makes the Conservatives look very out of touch. And if Rishi Sunak can't see that, is he the right person in the job?
Absolutely, and I think most of us would probably applaud anybody that works hard and pays their taxes, and Nadeem Zahawi has such an interesting backstory of having arrived here from Iraq and worked incredibly hard to get himself where he is. But the British public have very little patience, I think, at the moment for anything that looks dishonest. Talking of which, no accusation necessarily at the moment of dishonesty, but let's talk about Boris Johnson. Richard Sharp, BBC chairman. What do we know about that? Has there been any statement from the government? Remind us the story, Olivia.
So the story is that Richard Sharp loaned Boris Johnson £800,000 when he was in financial difficulty. We know that Boris Johnson has been in and out of financial difficulty most of his adult life. And Richard Sharp is a former big Tory donor. And there are now question marks over whether this should have been looked into when he became director of the BBC. So it's another awkward story for Boris Johnson. But at the same time, of course, he's got the Privileges Committee coming up, which in a way might be the bigger issue than this Richard Sharp. This is almost a sideshow. The Privileges Committee has released a report today, just buckling down basically on how they expect, the absolute top conduct from those in public office. They expect them to be setting an example. And the Privileges Committee investigation into Boris Johnson begins in March. So it just feels like there's a lot of sleaze allegations swirling around the former Prime Minister. And he is, has been in Kyiv, is posing as this statesman, and he's making life very awkward for Rishi Sunak. And of course, we mustn't forget that although relations between Sunak and Johnson have obviously soured, Sunak served in Johnson's cabinet for a long time. So whatever mud sticks to Boris Johnson will stick to Rishi Sunak as well. So we're beginning to see, I think you're very right to raise the question of Sunak's political strength, because that is the picture that's beginning to emerge. This personally straight-laced sort of a man who, he's a teetotal, he wants to play by the book, but doesn't have the strength to boot out those around him when it's clear that his inner circle isn't playing by the book.
And do we have any idea, last question, about the timescale around Zahawi? Because if an investigation has been ordered now by the ethics advisor, that's not going to be quick.
No, and we know that, we don't know exactly what the timeframe will be, but Dominic Raab, remember those bullying allegations, that was months ago. He's still under investigation by the ethics committee. So it's more likely that Zahawi will perhaps be pushed out or feel the need to resign before we see any result to this. But again, that would raise questions as to Rishi Sunak's political credibility if Zahawi stands aside himself rather than the Prime Minister taking the executive action.
OK, thank you, Olivia Rutley. Now then, the 16-day wave of rolling teacher strikes in Scotland is well underway. Members of the Educational Institute of Scotland are striking in 2 local authorities per day from January the 16th until February the 6th. Strikes are happening today in Stirling and East Renfrewshire. Andrea Bradley is the General Secretary of the Educational Institute of Scotland. Good morning, Andrea. So 16 days of rolling strikes across Scotland. Is it simply desperation that has led the teachers to taking this action?
I think not so much desperation as frustration that months of negotiations have been largely unfruitful. The teachers' pay claim was lodged almost 351 days ago. So the Scottish Government and local authority employers in Scotland have had a very long time to consider it and to respond, as we would think, appropriately. And sadly, they haven't done that. And that has meant that we've got, once again today, this is day 7 of that 16-day rolling programme of strike action. We've got teachers on picket lines and at local rallies rather than in classrooms where they would much rather be, being paid fairly for the work that they do, the very important work that they do.
How many children are affected today and this week by these strikes, Andrea? Do you know?
I don't know the exact number of children, but they are 2 local authorities, so we're talking in the thousands of children. There will be probably in the hundreds of schools impacted today, and it will be thousands of children and their families whose education and working lives are being disrupted. But this is all avoidable. It's all avoidable if the Scottish Government and COSLA would simply put the funding towards a fair settlement for teachers for this financial year.
People will say, of course, that children have been through so much in the last 2.5 years. We've got educational attainment for some cohorts, which will never be clawed back, regardless of extra hours in the classroom. And now the teachers are depriving these children of this education that they need. Surely they have a duty of care to these kids.
So we would say to that, absolutely. We absolutely understand that the impact that the pandemic has had on children's education, children's family lives, all of that. But the responsibility for the closure of schools that we're seeing as a result of strike action rests with the Scottish Government and COSLA. They have the power and the means to resolve this dispute, and as yet they simply have chosen not to do that. So the responsibility for the disruption rests firmly with them. We have been negotiating for months over this. We have been round the table, but unfortunately, as yet, those discussions have not brought forth the kind of settlement that would be acceptable to teachers in Scotland, and that's unanimous across all of the teacher trade unions.
How far apart are you, Andrea, in terms of reaching a resolution?
So I would say quite far apart, because the Scottish Government and COSLA have not moved on their 5% offer for almost 5 months now. So they have got some further work to do, some further thinking to do about how they can bring this dispute to a swift resolution. That is very much what our members would wish to see, and it's very much what parents in Scotland would wish to see. But parents in Scotland are very much behind the action that teachers are taking. They understand the value of teachers to their children and young people, and they understand the absolute importance of paying teachers properly and fairly for the really important work that they do.
What percentage would you be happy with?
So the claim is for 10%, and that amounts to a real terms pay cut, given the the heights that inflation has reached over the course of this financial year. What we have been saying, and what we have said from the outset, is that every negotiation involves compromise. But sadly, what is being sought by the Scottish Government and COSLA at the moment is full and one-sided compromise, only on the part of teachers, with very little being conceded by them. In fact, nothing being conceded by them in the last 5 months.
OK, well, I hope you sort it out soon, because the kids deserve better. Andrea Bradley, General Secretary of the Educational Institute of Scotland there. Right, we have got a Twitter poll running this morning, as we always do. I'm asking you, if Nadeem Zahawi has lied about his taxes, are you confident that Prime Minister Rishi Sunak would have the leadership? We could have chosen all sorts of words there. Would he have the leadership to expel him from the party? Cast your vote now. Also, send me your emails. I'll get through to some in the next few minutes. gbviews@gbnews.uk. But after the break, reports this morning that Metropolitan Police recruits are being hired without face-to-face interviews. Do we need to reevaluate this vetting process? We're going to get stuck into that and much more with my panel after the break.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you. GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed. So I guess they've always been quite woke. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Very good morning. It's 10:22. This is Bev Turner today on GB News. Thank you for joining me. My guests are here this morning. I'm delighted to be joined by author and academic Joanna Williams and political editor of the Daily Express, Sam Lister. Right, ladies, I have a feeling we might agree on a lot today, but that's all right. Yeah. I'm OK with that. We're like a more intelligent loose women today. Right, your story in the Express today, Sam. Nadeem Zahawi, how serious is this? Do you think?
I think it is actually very serious for him, but it's a classic one of those stories where it's quite complicated. It's not very exciting to the ordinary man on the street, but it just adds to this sense of things being a bit off
around the government, which is really bad for them, actually, because it's just another thing that they've got to kind of fight. So although I don't think people necessarily are, you know, personally thinking, wow, this man must go. I think a lot of people are thinking, who is this man? What's he actually done wrong? It all sounds a bit, you know, but actually it does just add to that sense of things are a bit kind of smelly around.
And in a way, Jo, it's, you know, if things were great in the economy, we all felt like we were having an excellent NHS and a wonderful education and our children were going to school every day and getting really well served by the teachers. You can tolerate a little bit of murkiness within the government. But when we feel that everything is broken...
Absolutely.
They can't necessarily... as the government, it's hard to know how they handle this as well.
No, absolutely. And I think the other problem is that it reinforces this idea that the government are just completely out of touch with ordinary people. I mean, I don't know about you two, but when I'm careless with money, it's when I've maybe left a tenner in my back pocket and put it in the washing machine, or, you know, I've dropped a couple of quid on the floor by mistake. Being careless with money is not failing to declare £5 million on my taxes, or you know, allegedly failing to declare that money. So the huge sums that we're talking about and the language that's being used to describe it of carelessness just gives this impression of these people. I mean, we know Rishi Sunak is fabulously wealthy. Again, with the Boris Johnson story, if I was feeling a bit hard up at the end of the month, I'd ask a mate to maybe lend me 20 quid. The idea of being given a loan of £800,000 is just unimaginable.
Underwritten by your friend, underwritten by your mate. I mean, I guess, you know, politics has always had these sorts of dynamics, hasn't it? It's always had rich men helping out rich men, and it doesn't necessarily cause any harm. Sometimes it might be good, but as you say, it just stacks up the optics of this are really bad. Also, are you concerned, Sam? I think, you know what, I think a lot of people's ears will prick up about this story about Nazeem Zahawi, because as you say, to some extent, like, well, how can I relate to this story on any level? It's also the fact that it was his shares in YouGov. Do you think people know that he started the polling company YouGov? Because that smacks of perhaps not necessarily impartiality.
Well, I think, you know, it was in the year 2000. It was a long time ago. He's not kind of been involved for some time. And so I think before he entered politics, you know, all that kind of thing, he moved on from all that. But I think, you know, there is another side. You know, actually, it's not a bad thing to have people in government who are successful businessmen who've started a company from scratch, who have come over here. You know, he's from a family of refugees, and he's come over here and he's made a wildly successful business, and that is a good thing. You know, that is to be applauded. So we have to kind of, we don't want everybody in government to be, you know, struggling exactly the same way we all are. We want people who actually know how to get things done. He's also the man who was relied upon. He's one of the people in government that they actually do turn to if they want to get things moving. He's seen as somebody who can solve problems. So, you know, I think it's important to remember all that. I think the problem is for Rishi Sunak, he came to Downing Street, on the steps of Downing Street, said, look, my government, it's going to be a government of integrity and transparency. And that's such a dangerous thing because you cannot control the events around you. And I know in Downing Street, there's certainly some frustration. They feel a bit like they've been hit by all these things in the last few weeks about Boris Johnson, about Nadeem Zahawi. They feel like, oh, these are events beyond our control. That is what being Prime Minister is all about. You cannot control things. You have to be able to react to them. That is the number one thing you need as a quality as Prime Minister.
And he kind of made, and Sunak almost made a rod for his own back, didn't he, by making that statement. We probably all watched it at the time when we went, oh, good luck with that. Well, that's proven to not necessarily work out. Right, Met Police. Joanna, this is a really strange story. We want more police officers. It looks like during the pandemic, the interview process changed slightly and it hasn't gone back to what it should be. The headline in the Times being Met Police hire officers without face-to-face interviews.
Absolutely.
What?
Well, completely. Good question. So during COVID pandemic, like many people, the Met Police went over to working from home, presumably, or doing much of their operations via Zoom. The recruitment process was carried on online, so interviews were conducted with people, presumably in their homes, in an office somewhere else, and all done via Zoom. But the problem is people saying, you know, unless you actually sit down with someone face to face, you can't really get a proper judgment of their character. When you start conducting interviews through a screen, it's all a little bit removed. removed. It's a little bit artificial. And the idea that thousands of police officers have been recruited in this way, and it is still going on now when COVID provides no excuse for this carrying on anymore. You know, I think too many people are working from home. We're seeing some of the consequences of this. I mean, you've documented it more than most people, Bev, in all aspects of life. But I mean, even just today, there's this story about the Met Police still hiring officers through online interviews. But we're also seeing huge problems in the probation service, huge mistakes that probation officers are making, miscategorising offenders as low risk or medium risk when they should have been categorised as high risk. And you've got probation officers still working from home. You know, and I think serious questions need to be asked about the quality of training, the quality of the work people can be doing when they're still working from home.
If you were hiring somebody, Sam, to work at the Express as one of your political reporters, would you feel you had to meet them in person?
Yeah, I mean, I've just been actually doing that process, and there is no way I would bring anybody into the team without actually seeing them face to face. I mean, it's astounding to me. And, you know, nobody's lives are going to be put at risk if I bring in a reporter without... But, you know, actually...
You can't do good grammar.
Yeah, that's it, you're banished. But, you know, it's astounding to me that the Met would allow this to happen. And I think, actually, one of the experts makes the point that if you recruit somebody into the force, they've got 30 years then, potentially, to be doing bad things. So it's really important to, at the very, very start, weed out the people who are potentially wrong-uns. And, you know, it shouldn't just be a box-ticking exercise. This is the point where you have to make sure that these are the right people, because once they're in the service, it's very hard to get rid of them.
Can we just look at this one positive police story as well? I want a positive police story because the police do the most important job. This is 170 arrests made by the Met Police cracking down on serious criminals. I don't know whether I've come to this a bit early for you, Jo, whether you've had time to get your head across this. But the figures in this are great. 30 knives and weapons were recovered, 40 drugs seized, 66 vehicles, 5,700 in cash, more than 70 arrests, a 3-day crackdown. When the police get it right, they can really get it right.
Well, they can, but and I think you're right. You know, this is a good news story. I'd far rather these people were not on the street. It sounds like a good thing that they've been taken off the street. And it seems like one of the main factors behind this is that you've had cooperation between different police forces working together across the country. But I mean, it does beg the question, if it can do this once, why aren't they doing this all the time? You know, if working together in this way and actually having this level of cooperation can bring about these good results, it seems a little odd to me that this would be a one-off thing. And it kind of suggests that perhaps if this was in place as a routine thing, then you might be making these arrests as on an ongoing basis.
It's called Operation Pandilla. It focused on arterial roads and motorways in and around London, including the M25, blah, blah, blah. Used automatic number plate recognition and intelligence to target vehicles linked to violent crime. And what I took from this story, Sam, is how much gang-related crime, organised crime, is such a big issue for our police.
Yeah, and I think that's it, organised crime. It's a bit... Police have targets to meet. They have, you know, ministers set targets. Police have to meet targets. It's very easy to go for the low-hanging fruit. Actually, organised crime, that is the root of the problems in our society, and that's where the resources should be focused. But obviously it's incredibly complex, very difficult to deal with. It's much easier to kind of go for those easy hits and boost your targets, to boost your figures elsewhere to look like you're doing well as a force. But obviously, when they want to be able to do it, they can do it. It's, you know, it is a question of where are you putting your resources? You know, what's your priority? Is it policing Twitter or whatever, or is it actually getting out there and doing this kind of stuff? And actually, the police do have a terrible you know, a terribly hard job. It's actually, you know, it's really gruelling work. I wouldn't want to be a police officer because I know how hard it is to do that day in, day out. And so you have to think, you know, we do need to give credit to police for the work they do well.
OK, well, a good news police story. I'm delighted to say that. Right, after the break, time for your latest round of business news with Liam Halligan. We'll be here. We're going to crunch all the numbers after the news with Tamsin.
Bev, thanks very much. It's 10:33. Here are the headlines. A report by the probation watchdog in England and Wales has found a catalogue of failings left a sexual predator free to kill Zara Alina days after he was released from jail. Jordan McSweeney was given a life sentence last month after he admitted killing the law graduate in East London as she walked home. The government has ordered a review into how probation staff supervise a 29-year-old.
The probation service, I think, has completely accepted the recommendations the inspector has made. They're making changes to the way they risk assess offenders. They're putting more resources into it. They've hired, I think, an extra couple of thousand, 2,500 probation service staff in the last 2 years. They're increasing their funding by £155 million to make sure this doesn't happen again. They're supervising, I think, over 200,000 offenders. This kind of incident is thankfully very rare, but it is appalling and heartbreaking when it does happen.
The BBC chairman says he will not stand down from his role over the Boris Johnson loan row. It's after Richard Sharp welcomed a review into how he got his job by the Commissioner of Public Appointments. Speaking to the BBC, Mr Sharp says he's confident he was appointed on merit. Latest figures show government borrowing hit a new record high last month as the cost of living crisis continues to hit households. The Office for National Statistics says the government borrowed £27.4 billion in December, the highest monthly figure since 1993. They say it's been caused by the increasing cost of energy support schemes and soaring debt interest. Nearly 2 decades after fox hunting was banned in Scotland, MSPs are due to back further restrictions on hunting with packs of dogs. The new Hunting with Dogs bill will introduce a 2-dog limit and a ban on trail hunting entirely. Since 2002, it's been against the law to hunt a wild animal with a dog, but the Scottish Government says the loopholes in current laws have been exploited to continue the practice. TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News.
He's the king of breakfast TV and he's back.
Eamon Holmes, back on the TV
Surprised
with me this morning.
Even remember my name.
I know, it's been 4 months. You have holy water by your bed?
Oh yes,
Oh, good.
already to bless.
Oh, Eamon. Oh.
Why do you not believe anything I say?
Eamon Holmes back on GB News Breakfast at 6 a.m.
Every weekend, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Bigger and better, starting at 8 p.m. Friday and Saturday.
Can't be too safe. Bring it on. Has there ever been a more innuendo feature?
And Sundays, we're on at 9.
It's ridiculous. Just get on with it. Maybe you should get a proper job.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you
I'll
are.
put that as my ringtone. My political ambitions are, those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Very good morning. It's 10:37. This is Bev Turner Today on GB News. Thank you for watching and listening to us. Now, your views have been coming in. I've got this Twitter poll running about Nadeem Zahawi, about whether, if he has lied about his taxes, do you have any faith? Are you confident that Prime Minister Rishi Sunak would have the leadership skills to expel him from the party? At the moment, the statistics are that 75% of you say no, you don't think that he would expel him from the party. Then raises the question, what's the point of the investigation anyway? Phil has said on Twitter, I think Nadine would beat him up. I think he's metaphorically speaking. I don't think he means literally. Sean on Twitter says, no confidence of the Tory leadership. Can't see them expelling Zahawi, but he should have been clear about it. Another one, PD says, Zahawi needs dismissing, sacked from ever holding a position of trust in the government. Corruption is not allowed. Sunak keeping him in says Zahawi has stuff on Sunak too, but we know some of it as it is, but media are not reporting it. Keep an eye on the public. You know, he hasn't been found guilty of anything yet, so we have to be really careful about this, but obviously they are investigating it. And as we were saying before, the optics of this just look really bad. Now, Britain's government borrowed more last month than in any December since records began 30 years ago. It reflects the cost of energy support and soaring debt interest linked to rising inflation. So GB News' economics and business editor Liam Halligan is with me now in the studio. Hang on a minute. We've got the highest tax burden for 70 years. Why are they still having to borrow more than ever?
These numbers are pretty eye-watering, Bev. As you say, this is the most the government has borrowed in any December on record. Let's see how the numbers stack up. I've got a little graphic here, and I can walk through this for TV and radio viewers. So December 22, there it is, 27.4 billion. That's 27,000 million pounds borrowed in that one single month. That compares to just under 17 billion in December 2001. So a massive percentage increase in borrowing. Why is it happening? Because even though oil and gas is lower than it was before Putin invaded Ukraine, household energy bills are still massive, more than twice what they were. A discussion to be continued, I think, at some point. And that means the energy support scheme, that accounted for £7 billion of government borrowing.
So that was what Liz Truss was getting so excited about when she was in office for 5 minutes.
That's right. That's the energy support package that Liz Truss introduced. Remember, she was talking about it in the House of Commons, and then the Queen, the terrible news from Buckingham Palace that the Queen was, you know, in unfortunately the last stretch of her life. But here is the absolute killer in terms of borrowing. Interest payments on debt, £17.3 billion in 1 month, right? Now, all these big state people, they say, oh, we can just borrow, we can just spend lots of money. If you don't spend lots of money, you're a horrible person, right? The flip side of spending lots of money that you don't have, just to be a nice person, is that you spend £17.3 billion on debt in a single month. I mean, that's like 3.5p on the basic rate of income tax.
Who's getting that?
International investors in many cases.
Do you know what I mean? It sounds like a really obvious question. If I borrow money from the bank, I know who's getting the interest I'm paying back. It's that bank. Is it just massive global banks that we're paying that interest to?
Well, it's also ordinary people. Ordinary people buy gilts.
Yes,
wealthy people to put their money in. And it's not just the fact that interest rates have gone up, though that's important. This is what happens when inflation goes up. And in order to promote your debt on international markets to make sure people buy it, what the government's been doing increasingly in recent years is buying what we call index-linked debt. What does that mean? It means it goes up, what you're paid, as inflation goes up, to preserve the value of the money that you lent to the government. And increasingly, our government debt is index-linked. So as inflation has gone up, the government has to pay not just higher debt interest, but also higher inflation compensation to those international banks and so on that have been lending us money. And then they have to borrow money more to pay the debt interest on the previous debt. This is what happens when governments get too big.
Well, it's when governments get too big, but also, well, how much of this is about how much we paid out during the pandemic? About £500 million, wasn't it? They found, wasn't it 500 million or something?
No, it's 500, OK.
At least.
It was about 400 billion that we paid out during the pandemic, right? On furlough, on business support loans.
Sorry, you're right. Look, it's £500 billion.
It's £500 billion. What? Getting on for £500 billion.
Do you remember when trillion was a word we didn't used to hear very often?
Absolutely.
Something happened in the last 3 years that trillion has just become kind of normal now, hasn't it?
Get used to it. Inflation happened. So the size of the debts that we're dealing with and the price of everything we pay is going up. The danger is, though, Bev, is that as the monthly borrowing total goes up, so imagine you're putting more on your credit card, right? Your overall debt increases. The stock of debt that you owe based on the borrowing that you've done every previous month and in previous years. And our stock of national debt is now 2.5 trillion. That's right, it's 2.5 trillion. It was less than 1 trillion before the global financial crisis, and now in 2008-9, and now it's 2.5 trillion. And the debt in payments on that debt, even if inflation comes down, will remain high for a long time. But you know what? That's like 100% of our GDP, right? So our debt is the size of all the economic activity in one single year. And that's eye-watering, that's high, but it's still relatively low compared to the other advanced countries. In France, it's 115% of GDP. In Italy, it's almost 150% of GDP. In America, it's about 130% of GDP. The danger is, though, that as the total stock of debt cranks up, the government's got to borrow more and more money to pay the interest on the existing debt. And that's when financial markets start to get worried. And that's why we've had the kind of cutbacks of the last few months, precisely because these big borrowing numbers have been in the pipeline, and they're actually, to people like me who follow these things closely, they're actually quite shocking.
All right, thank you, Liam. Wow. OK, moving on. Last year, Scotland avoided breaching legal air pollution limits for the second time since 2010. The last time was during the pandemic, when the country headed indoors and off the roads. The most significant improvement of air quality was recorded in Glasgow, where restrictions are rolling out in preparation for the full enforcement of a low-emission zone on June the 1st. Our Scottish reporter, Tony Maguire, has more.
Did you know the literal translation of Glasgow from its Gaelic name is Dear Green Place? Well, it's about to become a whole lot greener. Scotland's largest city will enforce its own LEZ zone this summer, much to the delight of environmentalists and the dismay of the city's cabbie population. I spoke to Unite Cab Section Chairman Callum Anderson about the timing of the LEZ and the impact on cabbie livelihoods.
The reason we're here today is that the taxi drivers in Glasgow were just looking for a little bit more time to transition into the low emission zone. Glasgow is the only city in Scotland to put such a draconian time limit on this. From the 1st of June this year, they want all vehicles, taxis to be compliant for getting into the city centre. The rest of the cities in Scotland have been given till at least 2024. We've been given till June 23. While we all want clean air, I've no doubt about that, it can't be at the cost of jobs and livelihoods, and that's exactly what this is doing. And it's livelihoods way beyond the taxi trade. In Glasgow, for example, we've got ready, people are so anxious about coming into the city.
Glasgow City Council say that they fully appreciate this is a challenging time for the city's black cab drivers. A council spokesperson said, considering the delay in the original timescale due to the pandemic, it's reasonable that Glasgow enforces the LEZ at the earliest possible opportunity to help bring down pollution levels to a more acceptable level.
Private bus companies, they were receiving grants up to 50% of the cost of a vehicle. We don't have such a luxury. This is down to each individual to finance it. Currently, the Scottish Government will offer a 0% interest-free loan for 6 years on a new vehicle, but new vehicles are over £60,000. We've asked them to give the same consideration to second-hand vehicles that are zero emissions capable. Now, the Glasgow market relies heavily on London for the second-hand vehicles because obviously our turnover is not comparable to London. There isn't any availability of these vehicles, but within the next year or two, they will become available. And if we could get the Scottish Government Energy Savings Trust to offer a finance package, it will be basically affordable and it will stop a lot of people leaving the taxi trade.
New figures out just this week show that Scotland did not breach legal emission zone requirements in 2022. So the zone is working for the environment. But time will tell if Glasgow cabbies can find a way to make it work for them. Tony Maguire with GB News, Glasgow.
Thank you. Right, my guests are back here with me this morning. Author and academic Joanna Williams and political editor of the Daily Express, Sam Lister. You've also been getting in touch with me, talking about Zahawi. Larry has said if Nadeem Zahawi does not recognise the furor that his tax affairs would cause with the general public, he should not be an MP. As for claiming it was a mistake, this seems unbelievable in that he has no doubt paid tax specialists thousands of pounds to deal with his tax affairs. Has he sacked these? Yeah, you would think, wouldn't you? That might be one of the first things he would point out. It's not like he's sat at home filling in his own numbers, I wouldn't have thought.
No. Doing his self-assessment.
Doing his self-assessment with his multi-million-pound businesses. Right, ladies, And I say ladies quite pointedly in relation to this story. So, Government of Jersey posted this advert to attract people, women, to go for a cervical smear. So this is the image that they posted. That is apparently someone with a cervix. If you're listening on the radio, it's a human being with a moustache wearing a man's suit and looking, to all intents and purposes, like a man. I don't think that's transphobic to say that, right? I'm sure they're delighted to say that they look like a man. It's a compliment. But this is what the tweet says. If you are a transgender man, a gender non-conforming person, or assigned female at birth and with a cervix, you can book your free cervical screening today. Contact your GP. And I read this on Lister and I was like, there's something missing from this advert asking for smear tests. Women!
Yeah.
What's going on?
I don't know, because I think, particularly with cervical screening, it's really difficult to get women to go for cervical screening. It's always been a problem. Yeah. Doctors have constantly tried to kind of improve the rates of people taking up cervical screening. So why would you if you're trying to encourage women to go for a smear test, why would you make a really confusing advert? I just don't get it. And if you are a transgender man or gender non-conforming, as the advert says, you are going to be acutely aware of your needs. And so I don't see why it's being focused towards to those people. Just make it clear, it's about women, and I think that's a really simple,
I think the problem is the word woman has become like a dirty word nowadays, where the word woman itself is considered to be almost transphobic. Having a cervical smear test for women is so important, absolutely vitally important for a woman's health. And if we can't use the word woman in this context, so many people are going to end up missing out on having these vitally important medical tests. But I think it's not just in this advert. We see it so many times. You go to, say, the British Library, and it's the women's toilets that have to become the gender-neutral toilets. The men's toilets are still the men's toilets. We've seen this erasure of women, the word woman, from so many different walks of life. Then we've seen other examples recently in the past few days outside the Scottish Parliament, with people holding up placards saying decapitate TERFs, which is a horrible word, really, for women who are feminists who believe that being a woman is a meaningful thing. And this kind of erasure of women, I think, actually legitimises some of those horrible, violent responses towards feminists.
It's so funny, isn't it? Because I remember trying to raise awareness of this years ago because of the work I was doing with pregnant women in maternity services. And all of the midwives I was working with say, well, we don't talk about women giving birth, we talk about birthing people. And I remember, this is 10 years ago, and saying, I'm slightly worried about this. Because particularly in the area of healthcare, women need different procedures. We need different attention. I mean, talk about stating the blooming obvious. We don't have the same bodies as men, and therefore we need to make sure that we're getting the right treatments.
Yeah.
And it's how do we push back against it though? Because it doesn't feel like there is the will to do so sometimes.
I think there is more of a will now, because I think because of what's happened in Scotland and the changes, it's now become a clash between Scotland and Westminster. And the government, Rishi Sunak actually, is quite clear about this. He wants to make sure that women's rights are protected. So I think you will see more of a pushback from the government on these kinds of issues. And obviously you've got MPs, Labour MP Rosie Duffield, who is fighting the cause despite being repeated. I know, it's really tough for her. She's getting a lot of abuse.
And I think what the tragedy of it is, of course, that transgender people who generally, predominantly just want to live a quiet life and not cause too much problems, they're having their cause undermined so dramatically by the trans activists, who are a powerful and noisy group of people. But this, of course, leads us beautifully onto this next story, which is the league table of shame in women's healthcare. This is in the Telegraph. Britain is worse than China and Saudi Arabia when it comes to treatments accessible by women. And we're on a par with Kazakhstan.
It's It's really, really outrageous. I have to say, it doesn't come as a surprise to me. I was speaking to a friend of mine the other day who is Romanian. She's lived in the UK for 7 years now, and she was telling me that just before Christmas, she actually went back to Romania to have a doctor's appointment because it was quicker and easier for her to fly to Romania, see a doctor there and fly back to the UK than it was for her to get to see a doctor where she lives in England. I mean, that's horrifying. That should really shock us. But at the same time, you know, another reason why I'm kind of not surprised by this is because how can we campaign for better women's health care? How can we campaign for women to get the attention they need from doctors, from the health service, when the very same medical professionals find it difficult to even say the word woman, to put the word woman on their posters? You know, I personally have never referred to myself as a person assigned female at birth with a cervix. I mean, it's a mouthful, it's meaningless. Nobody talks about themselves in that way. So if we can't say the word woman, you know, how can we expect doctors to be able to give us better treatment?
Some of the numbers in this, Sam, I mean, on average, women in the UK now wait nearly 4 months for a first appointment with a gynaecologist. Nearly 38,000 women in England have waited more than a year for an appointment with a gynaecologist. It might be something really serious that might affect your fertility or your life. We're getting really short-changed. The women, it seems, worse than the men.
And also, it's those initial appointments with doctors. They are so... 10-minute slots. How can you meaningfully discuss anything in 10 minutes? And I think that's, you know, it's about that very basic starting process, isn't it? Does the doctor have time to actually listen to what you're saying and try to really work out what the cause of these issues might be? And it talks about how, actually, when women talk about suffering from pain, they're just dismissed. And, of course, you're going to be dismissed if you've only got 2 minutes and the doctor's in a rush and they've got to get on to the next person.
Yeah, women who suffered pain needed to see a doctor, on average, 4.3 times before the cause was diagnosed. Imagine being in some sort of chronic pain and having to go to the doctor 4 times before they've worked out what's wrong with you.
But it can go on for years. I mean, we have a case study in the paper today about a woman. It took years for her to be diagnosed. She had chronic pain all over her body and she was just repeatedly fobbed off. And I think that's, you know, it's not an unusual case, to be honest.
No, absolutely. Right, let me know what you think. GBviews at gbnews.uk. Has that been your experience, women of the NHS and getting treated? We're going to continue to discuss the future of the Tory chairman, Nadhim Zahawi, and his tax affairs after the break. See you in 2 minutes.
Hello, Alex Deacon here with your latest weather update from the Met Office. Another dry day for the vast majority. And again, we've got mild air sitting across the north, much colder conditions established across the south under the influence of this high pressure. Low pressure systems further north, and this weather front will mix things up a little bit as we go through tomorrow. But ahead of that, as I said, under that high pressure, most places dry. A little bit of drizzle here and there across northwestern parts of Scotland, but otherwise fine. Quite a bit of sunshine across Wales, northern England, the Midlands and southwest England, although there are some fog patches around which are taking a while to clear. Some brighter skies to the east of Scotland and some sunshine in Aberdeenshire. Could see highs of 12 or maybe 13 Celsius, generally 9 or 10 even where it's cloudy here. Sunnier skies further south, but temperatures only 4 or 5 degrees and struggling to get much above freezing where we see the fog. Now, that fog will thicken up for a time this evening, particularly through parts of Lincolnshire, Cambridgeshire, down towards the southwest, before the cloud starts to spill in later in the night. Cloud increasing further north as well. That's that weather front we saw earlier, bringing some rain to western Scotland and the north of Northern Ireland by dawn. And turning a bit damp to start the morning too across northwest England and North Wales. A frost-free night for many, but still a frost in the south first thing in the morning, and there could be some fog around for a time also. Then we'll start to see more of a change tomorrow as that band of rain sinks southwards across northern England into Wales, eventually into the Midlands. The odd spot in southern parts of England. Sunny spells return further north, but so will a fair few showers. Actually turning a bit colder behind that weather front because it is a cold front across Scotland and Northern Ireland, but still highs of 8 or 9 Celsius. A band of rain trickles south during Wednesday evening, so a little bit of rain across southern parts of England. Once that's cleared through, however, it then becomes much drier through the rest of the week. That weather front disappears, high pressure moves back in, keeping things dry for the vast majority, even into the weekend. Goodbye.
I'm Camilla Tominey. Join me on GB News on Sunday mornings for a politics show with personality.
On TV, radio and online.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion, and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236. And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Very good morning. Welcome to Bev Turner today on GB News. Before midday, we're getting to the bottom of Nadine Zahawi's possible tax avoidance. This follows the directive from the Prime Minister to the Independent Ethics Advisor to investigate the Tory party chair's tax affairs. Labour, of course, are calling for Mr Zahawi to resign. What do you make of all this? Let me know your thoughts. gbviews@gbnews.uk. Also, discounted energy bills for millions of vulnerable people are being considered as a long-term option to combat growing prices. Would that be a welcome development? I'll explain all of that and lots more after a look at the latest news.
Thank you, Bev. Good morning from the GB newsroom at 1 minute past 11. A report by the probation watchdog in England and Wales found a catalogue of failings left a sexual predator free to kill Zara Alina days after he was released from jail. Jordan McSweeney was given a life sentence last month after he admitted killing the law graduate as she walked home in East London last June. The findings show McSweeney should have been treated as a high risk of serious harm offender but was wrongly graded as a medium risk. Policing Minister Chris Philp says the government has ordered a review into how probation staff supervise a 29-year-old.
The probation service, I think, has completely accepted the recommendations the inspector has made. They're making changes to the way they risk assess offenders. They're putting more resources into it. They've hired, I think, an extra couple of thousand, 2,500 probation service staff in the last 2 years. They're increasing their funding by £155 million to make sure this doesn't happen again. They're supervising, I think, over 200,000 offenders. This kind of incident is thankfully very rare, but it is appalling and heartbreaking when it does happen.
The chairman of the BBC says he will not stand down from his role over the Boris Johnson loan row. Richard Sharp made the comments as he welcomed a review by the Commissioner of Public Appointments into how he got his job. Mr Sharp is under scrutiny over his links to the former Prime Minister and his role in talks over an £800,000 loan. Speaking to the BBC, Mr Sharp says he's confident he was appointed on merit. Latest figures show government borrowing hit a new record high last month as the cost of living crisis continues to hit households. The Office for National Statistics says the government borrowed £27.4 billion in December, the highest monthly figure since 1993. Chancellor Jeremy Hunt says the government is making tough decisions to get debt falling. Almost 2,000 ambulance workers in the northwest are walking out today in an ongoing dispute over pay. The government says it will continue to engage in talks with the NHS, but the GMB union says the ministers are belittling their efforts to save lives rather than discussing a pay offer. Northwest paramedic Paul Turner says they don't want to strike, but they want the government to save the NHS.
We are massively understaffed, and when we get called to jobs, we're struggling to get there. You know, we're hearing constantly on our radios that there is emergencies outstanding and no one to go to them because we're either queuing outside hospital or we just don't have the staff to respond. We've had 10 years now of austerity with no real term pay rises. We are constantly under inflation. And now I've got members right behind me and all over the UK that are returning to food banks and looking to other means to be able to pay.
A senior Conservative MP has suggested the Prime Minister did not know Nadeem Zahawi had any outstanding tax issues when he appointed him as chair of the party. Just a warning of flashing images coming up.
You're going to resign, Mrs Zahawi. You feel under pressure to resign, sir?
Rishi Sunak has ordered an ethics inquiry into Mr Zahawi's tax affairs after he admitted paying a settlement to HMRC following an error over shares in a polling company he co-founded. The former Chancellor has welcomed the investigation, saying he's confident he acted properly throughout. Police forces across England and Wales will adopt a new strategy to tackle organised crime. The tactic, known as Clear, Hold, Build, is being introduced by the Home Office following successful pilots in 7 forces, including West Yorkshire. The plan is that officers will clear gang members from crime hotspots, hold control of the area to stop other criminals taking over, and then, with other agencies, help build the area to keep crime down. A man has been charged with murder after a body was found dumped in a street in Wigan last year. Liam Smith was shot and covered in acid before being left on Kilburn Drive on the 24th of November. Michael Hillier from Sheffield has been charged with the murder and is due to appear at Tameside Magistrates Court today. At least 7 people have died in a mass shooting at 2 locations in the northern Californian city of Half Moon Bay. Officials say the suspect was arrested yesterday after driving to a police parking lot after attempting to turn himself in. It's the second mass shooting in as many days in the US state after 11 people were killed in Monterey Park on Saturday. The government is resisting calls for a large-scale pilot menopause leave programme. Ministers have also rejected a recommendation from the Women and Equalities Committee to make menopause a protected characteristic under the Equalities Act. Committee chairwoman MP Caroline Noakes says she's disappointed by the lack of action by the government in response to the committee's report. But the government says the suggested approach might not be the best solution to support women. Nearly 2 decades after fox hunting was banned in Scotland, MSPs are due to back further restrictions on hunting with dogs, packs of dogs. The new Hunting with Dogs bill will introduce a 2-dog limit and a ban on trail hunting entirely. Since 2002, it's been against the law to hunt a wild animal with a dog, but the Scottish Government says the loopholes in current laws have been exploited to continue the practice. Eligible households will receive peak time electricity discounts again today in an effort to avoid blackouts. 26 suppliers have signed up to National Grid's demand flexibility scheme between 4:30 to 6 p.m. tonight after its first live test yesterday. It involves paying businesses and households to turn off electric appliances for an hour or 2. This is GB News. That's all from me for now. Now it's back to Bev.
Very good morning. Welcome back to Bev Turner today on GB News. Here's what's coming up before midday. Nadeem Zahawi is under fire as the Prime Minister ordered his ethics advisor to look into the Tory party chair over a multi-million-pound tax penalty. We're asking, have you lost faith in this government? Low-income households could be getting lower energy bills as part of energy regulator Ofgem's call to help struggling households amid the cost of living crisis. Meanwhile, households will be paid to reduce their electricity use for the second day in a row. We discussed this yesterday. So are we having an energy supply crisis, and what does this mean for a net zero Britain? And on the panel this morning, the political editor at the Daily Express, Sam Lister, and the author, Joanna Williams. We're going to get stuck into some great stories between now and midday. And of course, I want all of your views as well, and our Twitter poll. If Nadeem Zahawi has lied about his taxes, are you confident that Prime Minister Rishi Sunak would have the leadership backbone to expel him from the party? Email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or tweet me at gbnews to have your say. So let's find out a little bit more about this story with Tory party chair Nadeem Zahawi facing calls for his resignation after the Prime Minister asked the independent ethics advisor to investigate the party chairman's tax affairs. In a statement, the former Chancellor of the Exchequer said that he was confident that he acted properly throughout over previously unpaid tax in the region of about £5 million was the penalty, the total penalty. Well, joining me now on this is founder of Tax Policies Associates Limited, Dan Needle. Good morning, Dan. You're also the bloke who broke the story, am I right? Wasn't it your Freedom of Information request which has led to this scandal now, actually?
It's hard to know where it started. There was an odd Freedom of Information request I put in ages ago. They came back in June 22 and said that there was a minister under HMRC inquiry. And I was working on this with Jim Pickard at the FT. And we thought, wow, that's massive. And then I got another reply, no, that was a mistake. No one's under inquiry. So that made me wonder quite what was going on. Then there was that amazing story in The Independent that Mr. Zahawi had been under investigation by the NCA, the SFO, HMRC. He denied it. But if you're under investigation, you may well not know. So that's what spurred me to take a look at Mr. Zahawi's tax.
So give us, if you can, a more detailed backstory of exactly what it is that he's accused of having done, or at least where it appears there may be some oversights.
So as a tax lawyer, quite a lot of what you do is looking at complicated corporate structures, maybe for someone buying a company, and they don't want to buy a company with a tax problem. So you're looking for little anomalies, things that aren't quite right. And there was one here. When he founded YouGov back in 2000, entrepreneurs founding companies normally take shares in those companies. Always take shares, founder shares. Initially not worth much, but if the company's a success, they can make a lot of money. Weird thing is, Mr. Zahawi took no founder shares in YouGov when he founded it in 2000. Instead, a mysterious Gibraltar company, owned by a trust controlled by his parents, took all the shares. And that looked really strange. I found that, and then I found that Gibraltar company, Balshaw, it eventually made something like £27 million profit from those shares. When I see that structure, I jump to the conclusion that this could have been an attempt by Mr. Zahawi to avoid tax on what turned out to be 27 million. I also think, looking at it, that's not going to work. Tax laws aren't that stupid. There's no loophole here. He's going to have paid tax on that, or he should have paid tax on that. But looking at all the effort that someone went to have those shares offshore, the thought occurred to me, well, maybe he didn't pay the tax that he should have paid. And so that's what I said back in July 2022, that this structure suggested that he could have created something to avoid paying tax. Actually, I think the tax was due. Did he pay it?
And am I right, Dan, just so that people can relate to this, this was capital gains tax, like we might pay on a second property, or if you've had investments in a business, there's a capital gain. And that's what it appears that he may not have been entirely transparent about.
Yes, it's a tax gets complicated, structures are complicated, but at its heart, it's really simple. If you acquire shares for nothing, and you sell them for £27 million, you have a capital gain of £27 million, you pay tax on that. I think Everyone knows this. And when you say it hasn't been entirely straightforward, when I raised this in July, Mr. Zahawi's answer was to reply that he's always paid his taxes on time and he's got no interest in this offshore structure. And his response was also to send lawyers to threaten me with a libel writ to order me to withdraw an accusation I'd made. And he sent similar letters across the press. He spent the next 6 months denying there was anything wrong, claiming he had no interest in this structure, whilst we now know at the same time he knew there was something wrong and went to HMRC to settle it.
OK, all right. Thank you, Dan. It's really fascinating to hear it laid out in that sort of detail. Dan Needle there. Thank you very much for talking to us. Well, let's get a little bit more analysis of what this might mean politically now from the former Special Advisor to Michael Gove, Charlie Rowley. When you hear it like that, Charlie, it does sound like not necessarily a smoking gun, but something's a bit whiffy about it.
Well, good morning.
Good morning.
And the two things, excuse me, I would say to Dan is that I think he's right. Tax is a very, very complicated thing for many of us. And I think in response to what Nadine would be thinking is that he thought there wasn't a problem because he obviously felt that he potentially didn't need to pay what was being required from HMRC, which is why there was clearly an ongoing dispute. But before he's paid what he has now, he clearly thought that there wasn't an issue. So I think those two statements do stand up. I think obviously it's a bit of a distraction for the government. It's a story that we don't want to be talking about. The government would rather us be talking about things that really matter to people and people's lives, whether it's about education, whether it's about nurses going on strike, whether it's about the railways working, whether it's about growing the economy, all of these things that the government has in its in tray. It doesn't want to be talking about internal and Conservative Party problems. But I think it's right that because of the complexity of this case, that an investigation is taking place by the independent ethics advisor who will get to the bottom of this and advise the Prime Minister accordingly.
What would you advise them to do? What would you advise Nadine Zahawi to do now?
Well, I think, look, Nadine has been very open about the fact that he thinks he has acted properly. He's been very clear that he's paid all of his tax that's up to date. He's paid it in the UK. It was not something that was deliberate. It was something that was deemed careless. But as I say, that tax has been fully paid up. And now I think it is right that he complies fully with the investigation that the Prime Minister wants to have into this affair. And once that's concluded, we'll have to wait for the Prime Minister's decision as to what to do next.
You've been in meetings with him. What's he like?
I think that there's no doubt that he is a great man. He is a brilliant minister. He was someone that during COVID was the vaccines minister, so he was central to the mission of distributing the vaccines right across the country, which have protected us all, which have given us the freedoms that we have.
It wasn't really that hard a job, that, though, was it? You had pharmaceutical companies desperate to get the vaccines out, and we paid them a huge amount of money. I don't give him a huge amount of credit for that. It's probably one of the easiest transactions to ever execute in the history of politics.
Well, it was, I think, on a logistical level, maybe quite a huge exercise. But nevertheless, he was responsible for that, solely responsible. And, of course, that took some weight off of the shoulders of the Department of Health, which obviously was dealing with a number of other issues relating to COVID. So he, as a new minister at that time, took the bull by the horns and delivered on that programme, and it was a huge success. So I think there is a lot of respect for Nadine Zahawi. He's a brilliant politician. He's a great man. He's very jolly. And so, we just have to wait and see what happens next.
What do you think will happen next? What's the timescale here? Because these inquiries, I was talking to our political editor, Olivia Otley, earlier, these inquiries don't happen quickly, do they? It can't be that difficult, though, surely. Somebody has to have a look at the tax records, talk to him, maybe talk to his accountant. Wouldn't you expect him to have come out by this point and said, there was a mistake at the time and I no longer am with that accountancy team? Something that would just be really easy.
Well, I think, again, what's slightly complicated is the fact that it sounds, by Nadine's own statement that he put out the other day, that this was concluded when he was Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, so not Chancellor of the Exchequer, so Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster when he was at the Cabinet Office. That was before Rishi became Prime Minister, and that was before Rishi appointed Nadine to the role of party chairman. So when it came to the specific appointment from Rishi Sunak appointing Nadine as party chairman, there was no issue around Nadine Zahawi's taxes, it seems to me, because they would have been fully paid up or paid back, and the dispute had been resolved. So the question that I think the Prime Minister will want to know is, how has it got from a dispute where Nadine Zahawi was Chancellor of the Exchequer, moved to another cabinet post, before then being advised that it was OK to become the party chairman, if indeed anything has taken place that would be deemed improper and incorrect?
It is surely completely... It just beggars belief that that Rishi Sunak wouldn't have known about this, or that Boris Johnson wouldn't have known about this investigation, doesn't it?
Well, I think...
How plausible is it that they didn't know that he was being investigated by the HMRC?
Well, if it would be for the propriety and ethics team within the Cabinet Office to advise the Prime Minister on appointments like this. When you talk about people's finances and personal finances, it's a very private matter, so it's not going to be common knowledge.
Chancellor of the Exchequer, though, should it, Charlie? If you're in trouble with the HMRC, that seems pretty in the public interest.
But I think the HMRC, of course, is tax laws are governed and implemented by the Treasury, but it's still a sort of an arm's length body, as it were. It's a bit like the Environment Agency and the Department for Food, Environment and Rural Affairs, and the NHS, which is a subsidiary of sort of the Department of Health. It has its own chief executive. It runs and operates in its own way. And Nadine, I think, would have thought that this is obviously a private matter with his own personal taxes, and therefore, but without getting too far ahead, the whole point of the investigation is to work out who knew what and when, and what conversations had taken place, what was on the record, what was known, what wasn't known about, and that's why the Prime Minister is right to say that there are questions still to be answered, and that's why he's launched the right thing to do, which is to launch the investigation.
OK. Thank you so much, Charlie Rowley, there, former Special Advisor to Michael Gove. You've been letting me know what you think about this story. Carol has said this man is staggeringly wealthy. The tax man is notorious for having disputes with the wealthy about their tax bills, but he's paid it, received a penalty for the delay due to discord. Surely move along. There's nothing to be worked up about here. And Stephen said, I'd just like to ask why the rich in this country, especially the Tories, seem to be able to run their lives and financial affairs to a different set of rules than the rest of us normal. Tax to the grave and beyond, people. It does feel a little bit like that, doesn't it? We've got a Twitter poll running on this this morning. I want to know if Nadeem Zahawi does turn out, if it transpires that he did lie about his taxes, whether that is to the Prime Minister or to HMRC, I guess you could say, should Prime Minister Rishi Sunak expel him from the party? In fact, would he? Let me know what you think. Tweet me at GB News. At the moment, 75% of you think that Rishi Sunak would do nothing. OK, coming up, I'm going to be joined back by my guest this morning, political editor of The Express, Sam Lister, and academic Joe Williams to debate more of today's top news stories. Let's take a quick break. See you in 2.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
He's the king of breakfast TV, and he's back.
Eamon Holmes, back on the TV with me this morning.
Even remember my name.
I know, it's been 4 months. You have holy water by your bed?
Oh, yes. Already to bless.
Yeah. Oh, Eamon. Oh.
Why do you not believe anything I say?
Eamon Holmes back on GB News Breakfast at 6 a.m.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you. GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance.
Now we're here to represent you.
Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good morning, it's 11:23. Thank you for joining us on GB News. This is Bev Turner today. My panel are back with me. I'm delighted to be joined by author and academic Joanna Williams and political editor of the Daily Express, Sam Lister. Right, I'm quite happy to take a break from talking about Nadeem Zahawi for a little while. It doesn't really seem that... Wow, it is quite shocking, I suppose, isn't it? You know, MP on financial scandal. Yeah, quiet, ladies. Right, 2 teenagers charged with the murder of 18-year-old man stabbed to death in broad daylight in front of shoppers in Ipswich. Knife crime. Sam, we're so busy at the moment talking about the economy, talking about strikes, and we're in a bit of a knife crime epidemic. It's awful what's going on with our teenagers.
Well, I think what struck me about this was we know there's been a problem in London for many, many years. It really has been quite terrible, the kind of number of incidents, actually, where teenagers have been injured, but also where they've been murdered. What struck me about this was this happened in Norfolk. I mean, you know, it's quite shocking. Yeah,
tourist hotspot. You know.
I mean, and it's. I mean, I'm not
broad
saying
daylight.
that we should kind of just think, oh, in London it's just normal behaviour, but it's to see this actually spreading out to other areas of the country, I think is worrying, and it shows that actually the government does need to find a way of dealing with this, and the police need to find a way of dealing with this. But what that is, I don't know. That's the $64 million question, isn't it?
Isn't it? Why do you think teen knife crime seems to be so out of control, Joanna?
I mean, I think you're right. It really does seem to be out of control, and it definitely seems to be extending beyond London. It seems to me as if this is a situation, again, as you say, which has been building for a number of years, and there's probably lots of different factors at play. I mean, I know this predates lockdown, but there's been massive problems, I think, caused by the fact that schools closed. And if you look at the statistics, there's still very, very high rates of truancy of a number of children. And there will be the most disadvantaged children who've not gone back to school. And it just seems to me that one thing that lockdown really crystallises, hasn't caused, but really crystallised, was a kind of lack of adult authority in society for a significant proportion of children, whether it's police or teachers or parents, even sadly as well, particularly fathers. You know, the figures who would have been in authority over children in previous generations are just not got the confidence or the capacity anymore to act in that role. And so I think this is a really serious society-wide problem that we have to really try to get to grips with.
It's so hard, though, isn't it, Sam? Because, yes, it's partly parental responsibility, of course it is. But also, I feel like schools no longer have the discipline that they used to have. Teachers are confused about what they can and can't do. The only people who aren't confused about their rights are the kids.
They're very savvy, you know, to kids today. They're very savvy about that kind of thing. And also, you know, really, do we really want to go down the American route where you've got scanners at the doors? I think that would be really depressing. And so it's trying to find a way to deal with it that doesn't just kind of resort to this terrible, you know, assumption that kids are always kind of, you know, on the step of being criminals or about to cause some kind of harm to their classmates. We don't really want to go down that horrible route, do we, of assuming they're all kind of bad. But you also have to find some way of dealing with this issue.
There's something also, I mean, these kids must be very brutalised because it's not like punching someone in a pub, which is awful, awful, awful. The act of taking a blade and putting it into another person's body is a level of detached violence which is becoming so common. There is something very, very wrong. We have to work out why. Yeah, go on, Joanna.
This is absolutely true, but I think we do have to remind ourselves that this is still rare. I mean,
Yeah.
becoming more
Yeah.
common, but this is absolutely
Yeah.
a minority
Yeah.
of children who are brutalised in that way. And the reason why I stress that is because I think, you know, I talked earlier about teachers, parents, police officers, but I wonder if collectively kind of all adults in society really need to step up to the plate and start really exercising some authority and discipline over children. I mean, people might think I'm foolish for doing this, but I saw a young boy, must have been 13, 14, walking down the street in front of me the other day and just threw a empty can of Coke. And I shouted, "Excuse me, I think you dropped that. You should pick
Good
that
for
up
you.
and put it in the bin." Well, you say good for me. A lot of people would say, "Oh, you shouldn't have done that. You know, he might have turned on you." But actually, I thought, you know, somebody does need to tell children how
Yeah.
to behave. And unless we do step up to the plate and actually kind of enforce this authority, then children will think that they can get away with these kind of things.
And it starts small and it gets bigger, doesn't it? Right, ladies, Jacinda Ardern, she's paid tribute to the greatest privilege of my life, she says on the last day as Prime Minister. As her statement of resignation, she said, "I have no more in the tank, Sam." And this was taken as a very female kind of statement. This story does raise certain issues. Has it been handled differently than if a male Prime Minister resigns?
Well, I think what's interesting, we don't see men doing this, do we? I mean, I don't remember a man ever actually saying, you know, I'm too tired, I just can't do everything. You know, that's just not the male psyche.
Can you imagine Boris Johnson when he resigned? Look, we know I've got loads of kids. I've got 6, 7. No one really knows how many kids I've got. I've never been completely honest about it. But they're really demanding, and now I just, you know, I have to go and do my childcare duty.
I mean, they don't. I mean, actually, to be fair, I was having a chat to a male MP last week, and he actually said he struggles with it because he has family issues that he needs to be at home for, and actually when you're away, you know, for 3 or 4 nights a week, it actually is putting pressure. And he actually talked quite openly, and I was quite surprised.
Can you tell us who that was?
It would be unfair for me to kind of, because he was talking privately, but I was quite struck because it's the first time actually any man in Parliament has said that to me. So I think it's quite unusual. You don't really get this kind of behaviour from men. So I think the fact that she has come out and said this, there is no precedent for treating it in any way because no man would ever admit, "I've got nothing left to give."
No, go on, Joanna.
I mean, I think the sexist double standard really is the fact that Jacinda Ardern's got away with a level of authoritarianism upon the people of New Zealand that I think a man would have perhaps been criticised for a lot more. I mean, if you look at some of the things that happened in New Zealand over the past couple of years, the devastation of the economy, the devastation of tourism, people kept out of the country from reuniting friends.
Devastation of relationships.
Absolutely. And I actually think, well, maybe with the exception of Justin Trudeau, but most men who'd been exercising that level of authoritarian control over a population would have been criticised and booted out long ago. And I actually think that because she is a woman, she has been able to get away with this kind of smiley, happy authoritarianism.
It's a sort of, rather than this kind of patrician relationship that we've had with governments, she was able to do it in a kind of matriarchal, I have your best interests at heart.
Absolutely.
And I am a mother and I know what's good for you.
And I think she's milked that throughout. And I don't blame her actually for it. I think it's the media really in this country as well and around the world, the kind of global elite, have given her that free pass and let her get away with playing that role. But I think you're absolutely right. It's allowed her to present a kind of smiley-faced authoritarianism.
I wonder if, when we think about this, I wonder whether I believe her, actually. I'm not sure I entirely believe her. Like, I can't do it all. Motherhood is so hard. Not just that I'm crushingly unpopular in the polls.
Exactly.
I mean, that is the issue, isn't it, really? Did she jump, or was she effectively, you know, she saw that she was going out, so, you know, jump before you push.
I mean, realistically, she probably isn't doing much of her own childcare, bedtime, bath time, breakfast and all that, is she? So, anyway, good news to her. Right, after the break, low-income households are set to be offered lower-cost energy deals. Is this a welcome development? Probably. We'll find out after your morning news.
Thank you, Bev. Good morning from the GB newsroom. It's 11:31. A report by the probation watchdog in England and Wales has found a catalogue of failings left a sexual predator free to kill Zara Alina days after he was released from jail. Jordan McSweeney was given a life sentence last month after he admitted killing the law graduate in East London as she walked home last June. The government has ordered a review into how probation staff supervise a 29-year-old.
Probation Service, I think, has completely accepted the recommendations the inspector has made. They're making changes to the way they risk assess offenders. They're putting more resources into it. They've hired, I think, an extra couple of thousand, 2,500 probation service staff in the last 2 years. They're increasing their funding by £155 million to make sure this doesn't happen again. They're supervising, I think, over 200,000 offenders. This kind of incident is thankfully very rare, but it is appalling and heartbreaking when it does happen.
The BBC chairman says he will not stand down from his role over the Boris Johnson loan row. It's after Richard Sharp welcomed a review by the Commissioner of Public Appointments into how he got his job. Mr Sharp is under scrutiny over his links to the former Prime Minister and his role in talks over an £800,000 loan. Speaking to the BBC, Mr Sharp says he's confident he was appointed on merit. Latest figures show government borrowing hit a new record high last month as the cost of living crisis continues to hit households. The Office for National Statistics says the government borrowed £27.4 billion in December, the highest monthly figure since 1993. They say it's been caused by the increasing cost of the energy support schemes and soaring debt interest. TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News.
He's the king of breakfast TV and he's back.
Eamon Holmes back on the TV
Surprised
with me this
you
morning.
even remember my name.
I know, it's been 4 months. You have holy water by your bed?
Oh, yes.
Oh, good.
Already to bless.
Oh, Eamon. Oh.
Why do you not believe anything I say?
Eamon Holmes back on GB News Breakfast at 6 a.m.
Every weekend, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Bigger and better, starting at 8 p.m. Friday and Saturday.
Can't be too safe. Bring it on. Has there ever been a more innuendo feature?
And Sundays, we're on at 9.
It's ridiculous. Just get on with it. Maybe you should get a proper job.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions. I have no time for cultural totalitarianism. We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Very good morning. It's 11:36. This is Bev Turner Today on GB News. Right, you've been getting in touch. Thank you very much. gbviews@gbnews.uk is the email. Let's read a few of them. 16 days of rolling teachers' strikes start in Scotland. Earlier, I spoke to Angela Bradbury from the EIS union there. Richard says teachers are the only people on strike that deserve a pay rise. They do a terribly hard job in today's social climate. I couldn't do that job for any money. Angie has said, looking at school holidays and set days, it looks as though that amounts to 12 weeks. So does that mean that teachers' pay is over 40 weeks? Seems like a good deal to me. And Judy says, I still remember my geography teacher. So do I, Judy. Mr. Perry, he was amazing. Teachers can have a really big impact on a child's upbringing. I think they deserve the pay rise they're asking for. They've been underfunded for years, like many other public sector bodies. So keep your messages coming in, won't you? Also, don't forget to vote in our Twitter poll at GB News. Now, households will be paid to reduce their electricity use for the second day in a row. The National Grid's demand flexibility scheme will take effect from 4:30 p.m. to 6 p.m. today. This comes as low-income households could be getting lower energy bills as part of energy regulator Ofgem's call to help struggling households amid the cost of living crisis. So joining me now for a roundup of all things energy is former CEO of Energy UK, Angela Knight. Good morning, Angela. Let's start with Ofgem's so-called social tariff for low-income households. What are the details? How will it work? And is it practical?
Well, it's a good idea. The details are going to be where the problems lie, but it's certainly probably the best way forward for those who are on low incomes. I mean, right now, we've all seen what happens. You know, there's support coming in different directions. It's complicated. And, oh, yes, you know, people are getting it. But then there are some people who don't seem to get the support. It doesn't come through. And the whole thing has been a little bit of a muddle. That's not a criticism, it's kind of stating the facts. So if we're looking ahead at an energy system which is actually going to cost all of us on the long term more than we were paying for our gas and electricity before the pandemic, as that is the situation, then the reality of how to deal with it for part of society, you know, has to be thought through, and actually has to be thought through quite quickly. How a social tariff works, there's all sorts of different ways of it, but in essence, it means that those who qualify for the social tariff pay for their gas and electricity at a lower rate than the rest of us. The cost associated with that will be picked up by, you know, what shall I call us, you know, the rest of the consumers. But that ability to offer gas and electricity to low-income people at an affordable rate is what a social tariff is all about.
We've been hearing, Liam Halligan's been talking about it, how the wholesale price of gas has come down significantly, but why hasn't that been passed on to the customer yet?
For the same reason that the high prices didn't necessarily get passed on to the customer. The suppliers don't just buy today and sell it to you tomorrow. They have long-term contracts, 3 months, 6 months, a year, or even more. And that means that they've secured their gas and electricity at a stable price. The way that is, or the reason that is done, is to make sure that there's always the energy to supply to you, the customer, at the rate that was originally agreed. Those companies, which you saw in the last year, 18 months, who didn't buy ahead properly are the ones who went bust because they'd agreed to sell at a certain price and they had to go out and buy on the wholesale market. What will happen now with the prices, the wholesale prices coming down, is that as contracts get renewed by the suppliers, so the price will come down for all the customers. At the same time, I think it's fair to say that because they come down, because contracts, you know, come up on a regular basis, what that means is some of those previously forecast very high prices of gas and electricity, of energy for us domestic users, it will not be achieved. So we are in a better situation, but just as prices went up over a period of time, so prices will take that period of time to come down.
Any idea of timescale, Angela? When can people look forward to their bills starting to decrease?
I would have thought by the next quarter. I keep forgetting which year I'm in, so I'm sorry. We're in Q1 now, 2023. So I would expect by Q2 we're going to see a much better position. And certainly as we get into the end of the year, the energy prices will be much more stable than they are at the moment, and they will be lower than at the moment. But as I say, anybody who is hoping for their gas and electricity price to go back to where it was before the pandemic and before the Ukraine war, I'm afraid, you know, that hope is in vain. And the reason it's in vain is because an awful lot of money has to be invested to give us security of energy supply, as well as meeting the targets for net zero. And that money, you know, it doesn't come from nowhere, and the cost of it will ultimately flow through to the price of gas and electricity.
OK, we had the launch of this new scheme last night to turn off all our appliances at between 5 and 6 o'clock, which no doubt caused arguments in households up and down the country as mothers nagged children to turn off devices and for somebody not to put the kettle on or turn the oven on. How successful was it, Angela? Do we know how many people changed their behaviour last night?
I haven't seen the numbers yet this morning. My suspicion is an awful lot decided they would have a go and see, if could they organise their households around it, and then wait and see what benefit they get in cash terms from their energy supplier. Realistically, though, if we look back, I'm old enough, by the way, to remember when you did have different tariffs at different times. There was something called Economy 7, and then there were night storage heaters. And so the broad idea of paying different prices for your gas and electricity, well, for your electricity in this instance, at times when it's not popular, it's times when there's not everybody on the system, is not a new proposal at all. It's just you can now do it in a different way with smart meters. So, no, I don't know the numbers, but given that I can see it's something that it's a bit like recycling. The Brits will really get engaged on it, and a lot of people will do it as long as it does not disrupt their household too much.
OK, we've got to move on. Angela, I could have spoken to you all day. You're always brilliant on these topics. Angela Knight there, putting us all in the picture, turning on the light bulb, letting us all understand this in a little bit more detail. Now, concerns are growing for a woman, her newborn baby and her partner almost 3 weeks since they went missing. Constance Martin and Mark Gordon are now the subject of an international missing persons investigation after a string of attempts to slip under the radar of authorities. They were last seen at East Ham Tube Station in Newham on the 7th of January with their newborn baby wrapped inside its mother's coat. Our national reporter, Ellie Costello, has the story.
Missing woman Constance Martin may have given birth in the back of a car, which was later found burnt out in the Greater Manchester area. Reports suggest that the placenta had been found by fire crews. The new mum is from an aristocratic family with links to the royals. She disappeared with her newborn baby and her partner, Mark Gordon, on January the 5th. The last official sighting of them was on January the 7th. So what do we know so far? Well, on the 5th of January, the couple left their abandoned car on the M61 near Bolton at around 6:30 p.m. The next day, the pair travelled 30 miles by taxi at 3:30 in the morning. On the 7th of January, they journeyed 267 miles south to the port of Harwich. They were then spotted in the Essex town of Colchester at 9 a.m. The last official sighting of the couple was at East Ham Tube Station between 10:30 and 12:30 on the 7th of January. Each time that Miss Martin and Mr. Gordon are spotted on CCTV, they are covering their faces or looking away, and they have kept their baby covered up. Investigators say the couple appear to know how to evade authorities, making the search for them even harder. Concerns are also growing as neither Constance nor the baby have seen a doctor. The family have no luggage as most of their belongings were destroyed in the car fire, but Constance is believed to have access to cash. Her father, Napier Martin, made a direct appeal to his daughter through the Independent newspaper.
Darling Constance, even though we remain estranged at the moment, I stand by, as I have always done and as the family has always done, to do whatever is necessary for your safe return to us. I beseech you to find a way to turn yourself and your wee one into the police as soon as possible, so you and he or she can be protected. Only then can a process of healing and recovery begin, however long it may take, however difficult it may be.
Little is known of Mark Gordon. He was born in Birmingham, but moved to the US with his family. When he was 15, he was convicted of rape and spent the next 20 years in jail. He was recorded as deported from the US in 2010. Constance and Mark Gordon appear to have gotten into a relationship in 2016 when she dropped out of drama school. She has been estranged from friends and family ever since. Photos on her Facebook shared in 2020 captioned "Her love sprogs" appears to suggest that she's had more than one child. In a statement, the Met Police say this is a complex investigation with officers from across the Met continuing to work around the clock to find Constance, Mark and their baby. There is nothing to suggest that any of them have come to any sort of intentional harm. We just need to ensure they are okay, especially the baby, and do not require any medical assistance for any underlying issues. Detectives are appealing for anyone with information or suspected sightings of the couple to get in contact with the Metropolitan Police. Ellie Costello, GB News.
Extraordinary story, that, isn't it? Now, let me introduce you to my panel this morning. Again, if you've only just joined us, where have you been? Author and academic Joanna Williams is here, and political editor of the Daily Express, Sam Lister. Right, Ghislaine Maxwell gave this very controversial interview from her jail cell, and a lot of people are saying that this is effectively the start of a campaign to rejuvenate Prince Andrew's image now that the Queen is no longer with us. What do you think, Joanna? Do you think that's part of it?
I think it probably is. I mean, it certainly seems to be heading that way. Prince Andrew has made some claims, I think, in recent days that he's going to be looking into this case again. I think what's lost in this story for me is the fact that Ghislaine Maxwell, you know, she has actually been convicted in a court of law and found guilty of child exploitation, trafficking. And, you know, the idea that we should take her word seriously when she's now come out and said that this famous photo, I'm sure everyone's seen it now, of Prince Andrew with his arm round Virginia Giuffre, you know, the idea that we should take her word seriously on this after she's been found guilty, you know, really beggars belief.
So she did this interview with Talk TV. None of us have watched it. It can't have been that gripping. It can't have been that interesting. I really wasn't interested. But I wonder whether there's an ethical issue here, Sam, about whether you should even be allowed to give an interview to be broadcast when you are a convicted felon.
Yeah, I mean, I can't see this happening with anybody in our penal system. You know, this is the American system that allows this to happen. And, you know, the point has been made that actually she's a disgraced woman. So why do we give her any airtime? Why do we listen to her? And I think if that's how Prince Andrew wants to rehabilitate his reputation, I'm not sure that's the best way to go. Turning to a woman who, you know, in most people's minds is utterly kind of unredeemable.
Yeah, because she, of course, is saying that she calls Prince Andrew her dear friend in this interview. She branded the accusations against him baseless in a desperate new defence of the Duke in this interview on the TV last night. Obviously, she's in prison for 20 years after being convicted in the US of masterminding a scheme to round up schoolgirls for Wall Street financier Jeffrey Epstein. You see, now that Prince Andrew has inherited money from his late mother, the idea is that he will go back to court now, Joanna.
I think it's not just that he's inherited money, but also Virginia Giuffre has come out in recent days, and one case that she'd brought against another particular man, she said that she had made a mistake in that she'd misremembered something, and that case has been dropped. So I think that's also being the case for him to look again at the money that he paid her. And obviously, whilst the Queen was still alive, I think there was a lot of attempts to kind of stop Andrew pursuing this in case it overshadowed the Platinum Jubilee, for example. And I mean, let's be honest, the Queen's final day, she had enough on her plate dealing with Prince Harry, never mind having to deal with this as well.
Yeah, absolutely. But you see, if he paid, so the rumour is, Sam, that he paid Virginia £12 million to make this all go away in an out-of-court civil settlement. Why does he now feel emboldened to take her to court? Because surely if you've paid someone that amount of money, it might mean that you just didn't want to deal with it. What has changed?
Yeah, I think it is that point that actually, you know, because there is now this kind of question mark over one of the cases involving Virginia Giuffre, that, you know, they seem to be seizing on that as a way to reopen this. But I think, you know, ultimately now, the public have decided what they think about this issue, and you can drag this back through the courts. I don't think it's really going to change people's minds. No. It just damages the monarchy further.
No.
And the king, you know, he's got enough on his plate with Prince Harry, and I'm sure he's absolutely distraught to see this might be dragged through the papers back again.
Now, I don't know whether you leave the studio on a day like this and head to Fashion Week, to the catwalks around the world. I know I don't. I head home to put a wash on, frankly, of the kids. And luckily, I don't have to put anything like this in the washing machine. So, Paris Fashion Week began. Kylie Jenner arrived at the first show of the season wearing a lifelike lion's head on her shoulder. If you are listening on the radio, I'm so sorry you can't see this image, but it is... Kylie Jenner looking beautiful in an off-the-shoulder black dress, but almost half entirely of her torso is covered with what looks like a realistic lion's head, but it is actually it's not even a stuffed head, it's just a fake head, right? But there's apparently this is caused uproar, no pun intended, Joanna, because it's being accused of promoting trophy hunting.
I mean, it's just bizarre, really. All aspects of this story are bizarre. I mean, for one thing, you can't see this fashion taking off. So I commute frequently by train, very crowded during rush hour. You can't see me on the underground anytime soon with a huge lion's head attached to my beautiful frock. But also equally bizarre then is the argument that protesters are using to say that this might promote trophy hunting. I mean, what it shows to me is that people who are super woke have no sense of humour. I mean, you've got to take a joke. It seems to bring great publicity to Schiaparelli. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that correctly.
That's the brand. Never heard of them before now. But Instagram, people have been saying we have to stop showing animals as luxury products. People can't wait to attack the silliest of things.
It is ridiculous. I mean, really, just, get a grip. But I think what struck me was actually how far a beautiful woman now has to go to get a bit of attention, I mean, actually, back in my day, it was the Liz Hurley in that dress,
yes, with the
which was safety pins all up. I mean, that was considered absolutely shocking, and it made her famous. And since then, we've just had increasingly short, see-through dresses to the point where actually now women will have to wear a kind of sheer dress with just the knickers. And that doesn't get attention anymore. So now, what do you do to get attention when you're on the catwalk? You put a lion's head on your dress. I mean, where do we go next?
And what's hilarious is underneath the picture, the designer said, no animals were harmed in the making of this look, in case you're completely stupid and think that's a real lion's head on that woman's shoulder. Right, one last story, Joanna. This was going... One particular MP had brought to the attention of the House of Commons that she wanted it's written into law that menopause would be a special characteristic. What's happened?
Well, the government's pushed back on this a little bit and said that women of a certain age, my age, won't be given leave have the legal right to have an entitlement to leave from work for menopause. I mean, a bit like you'd expect to have maternity leave if you were pregnant. Women in Parliament were pushing for those same rights to apply for women who were going through the menopause. I have to say, I support the government on this. I'm quite glad. If I go for a job interview tomorrow, I don't want the person who's interviewing me to be looking at me and kind of thinking, well, you never know, she might be asking for 6 months off in a couple of weeks' time for menopause leave. I think women could do without that, and I don't think it would do women any favours whatsoever to be seen. As far as I'm concerned, I'm in my prime, and I don't want people to be looking at me and thinking I'm just a nervous wreck of hormones waiting to erupt at any
And you
moment.
might be a liability to an employer. Right, we've just got to round up the poll. We've been asking you on today's show that if Nadeem Zahawi has lied about his taxes, whether he lied to the HMRC or lied to anybody that's employed him in government, are you confident that Prime Minister Rishi Sunak would have the leadership to expel him from the party? 25% of you have faith that the right thing would be done, and 75% of you said no, Rishi Sunak would not have the backbone to take any action. OK, we've come to the end of our show. It's flown by. Thank you so much to Joanna Williams and Sam Lister. See you again soon, ladies. Coming up next is GB News Live with Mark Longhurst. I'm Bev Turner. I'll see you tomorrow at 10.
Hello, Alex Deacon here with your latest weather update from the Met Office. Another dry day for the vast majority. And again, we've got mild air sitting across the north, much colder conditions established across the south under the influence of this high pressure. Low pressure systems further north, and this weather front will mix things up a little bit as we go through tomorrow. But ahead of that, as I said, under that high pressure, most places dry. A little bit of drizzle here and there across northwestern parts of Scotland, but otherwise fine. Quite a bit of sunshine across Wales, northern England, the Midlands and southwest England, although there are some fog patches around which are taking a while to clear. Some brighter skies to the east of Scotland and some sunshine in Aberdeenshire. Could see highs of 12 or maybe 13 Celsius, generally 9 or 10 even where it's cloudy here. Sunnier skies further south, but temperatures only 4 or 5 degrees. and struggling to get much above freezing where we see the fog. Now, that fog will thicken up for a time this evening, particularly through parts of Lincolnshire, Cambridgeshire, down towards the south